What sounds like fiction, but is actually a real historical event. The death of Ken Rex McElroy. He terrorized Skidmore, Missouri for decades, stalking, assaulting, murdering and raped two 14-year-olds who were his wives. He had an expensive attorney, so he was never charged. The law never helped the poor town. One day, the town gathered for a meeting on how to deal with McElroy. Details get a little vague here, but apparently someone alerted the room that McElroy was in the bar up the street. Quietly and calmly, everyone got up and walked over to the bar. As McElroy got into his truck, someone shot him in the back of the head. The town just went back to their business. When the witnesses, like the entire town, were questioned, everyone claimed they didn't see anything. No one has ever been arrested. In 1980, Lake Pigler in Louisiana drained like a bathtub with the plug removed. Oil drillers on a rig in the lake had hit a mine shaft below the rig. Barges, a tugboat and part of a nearby island got sucked into the largest man-made whirlpool ever. Operation Mincemeat. The Allies planted a dead body with fake battle plans to trick the Germans into thinking that the Allies were going to attack Sardinia when they were in fact going to attack Sicily. They built an entire life for this dead, fake military man, dumped him in the ocean, and successfully distracted the Germans. Edgar Allan Poe wrote a novel in 1838 in which 4 shipwrecked survivors, at the point of starvation, choose to resort to cannibalism. So they kill the young cabin boy, Richard Parker, and eat him. In 1884, a ship called the Mignonette sank. 4 crew members survived. At the point of starvation, they killed and ate the youngest of them, Richard Parker. In 1971, a teenage girl named Julian Cope was on a plane that was struck by lightning and disintegrated in the air. She plummeted 3,000 meters strapped to her seat and landed in the Amazon rainforest. Her mom had been on the flight with her, and Julian searched in vain for her mom. But Julian was the sole survivor of the crash. She survived 11 days alone, treating her maggot-infested wounds with fuel and using tracking techniques her father had taught her, before she found a boat that she used to make her way back to civilization. What an absolute legend. The Soviet scientists starving to death saving the seed bank of Leningrad during Hitler's invasion in the winter of 1941-42 despite it being full of corn, wheat and potatoes. Wojtek was a bear who fought Nazis in return for cigarettes and beer. He didn't die until 20 years after World War II. My favorite part about that story is that after the war he lived in a zoo. It was common for soldiers from the bear's company to come visit and simply jump into the enclosure to play with him, much to the zookeeper's annoyance. The CIA was researching psychic abilities for 30 years as a way to spy on the USSR. After 30 years, the program was terminated, and their conclusion was that psychic powers probably don't exist. Due to a military standoff that took years, 15 ships became stranded in an inland sea, and over 8 years formed a multinational ship-based society that even included its own currency. The battle for Castle Italy near the end of WWII saw US soldiers, French POWs, and the German army fighting on the same side to hold the castle against an SS tank division. To make it even weirder, the French prisoners included several prime ministers and a tennis star, 2 prime ministers, 2 French generals, a former SS officer and Charles de Gaulle's sister. Someone get Tarantino on the phone. He needs to work on this. The escape from Antarctica by the members of the Antarctic expedition led by Ernest Shackleton. The stuff they went through was unbelievable. Their boat, the Endurance, was crushed by ice floes. They were stranded on the floes for over a year in temperatures well below freezing. They then took to 3 boats around 22 feet in length across the Antarctic Ocean looking for land. There were about 10 men in each boat. They missed reaching land by just a few miles at times. 2/3 of them got stranded on Elephant Island surrounded by ice, while one of the boats went out in search of rescue. That boat made it through the Drake Passage, one of the deadliest places in the ocean. All but 3 of them got stranded with little food and water, while the 3 men who left became the first people to cross South Georgia on foot. They found civilization, rescued the men who came through the Drake Passage, waited months until they could rescue those on Elephant Island. Every single person who came on the initial voyage survived, with the worst lasting consequence being a single foot amputation. Unsinkable Sam. A cat that survived the sinking of 3 different ships during WWII. That cat 100% sank those ships. Apparently, death from laughter is an incredibly rare, but a completely legit cause of death. In the 3rd century BCE, Chrysippus, a Greek Stoic philosopher, died of laughter after he saw a donkey eating his figs, and Chrysippus is not the only isolated case. Among the few other cases, a 5th century BCE Greek painter, Zeuxis, is said to have died laughing at his painting of the goddess Aphrodite, for which an old woman who had commissioned the painting had insisted on modeling. Also, Cleopatra, the ruler of Egypt in the 1st century BCE, claimed that her retainer died laughing at her husband's death. According to the linked Wikipedia article, the most recent case is that of Ole Benson, a Danish audiologist, who saw a funny scene in a comedy film and laughed so hard that his heart rate rose to a point where he had a fatal heart attack in 1989. From what I understood from reading up on this topic, it's not the act of laughing itself, but rather a fatal repercussion from a fit of laughter, such as cardiac arrest, asphyxiation or aneurysm, which causes death. For instance, Ole Benson suffered a heart attack as a consequence of the terrible fit of laughter he had. It's possible that such was the case of Chrysippus and others as well. I always thought of "I'm gonna die laughing" as a hyperbole, and I myself use it quite liberally, but I guess every hyperbole has a grain of truth to it. The Bone Wars. To rival paleontologists, Othniel Charles Marsh and Edward Drinker Cope were in a race for academic clout, so they both took off to places like the fossil beds of Montana and Utah to try and dig up as many dinosaurs as possible before the other guy. But they didn't stop there, and hired spies and saboteurs to impede the other's work, as well as trying to pass off sloppy or fake skeletons sometimes. The overwhelming majority of iconic dinosaur genre that we know were either first discovered or simply got a lot of new samples to work with, and were made iconic by the amount of publicity they received. This includes Triceratops, Stegosaurus, some remains of Tyrannosaurus, Apatosaurus, and many, many more. This is also where the Brontosaurus confusion comes from. One of the scientists, I forget who, had already discovered Apatosaurus. The other then discovered a new skeleton of the same dinosaur, but intentionally put a skull from a different species, Camarasaurus, onto that skeleton, and tried to pass it off as a new species entirely, Brontosaurus. The fake was unveiled pretty quickly, but the name stuck. More recently, however, we have a lot more tools to distinguish smaller features from bones, and it was found that the skeleton that was originally passed off as Brontosaurus is actually barely different enough to receive its own genus, and the name Brontosaurus was revived. I've always thought that this could make a fantastic show, especially if it includes dramatized flashbacks to how the dinosaurs and the skeletons died. President Andrew Jackson's funeral in 1845. His pet parrot had to be removed because it was swearing loudly. An English king named Ethelred, later called the Unready, took some troops to defend against a Viking invasion. The weather was bad, so a lot of the Vikings' ships crashed as they were landing. Ethelred thought that it would be dishonorable to attack them as they were stumbling onto shore, so he kept his troops back until the Vikings had a chance to get together and form proper battle lines before he attacked them. The better prepared Vikings then won the fight and slaughtered a bunch of Ethelred's men, and he and the rest were forced to run away while the Vikings went around pillaging. Jean de Clisson 1359 was married to a French nobleman who was beheaded for treason by the French king. Enraged, she sold their estate and purchased 3 black warships with red sails. and became a pirate queen of the English Channel who targeted French ships. She became known as the Lioness of Brittany, and in her 13 years of piracy she would slaughter every member of a ship's crew except for one, so that last survivor could go back and tell the French king what had happened. Joshua Norton was just this random crazy guy from San Francisco who hated all this political nonsense that was going on at the time, and figured he could do the job better at it himself. And thus the Emperor of the United States and Protector of Mexico was born. While he held no real power, the people liked him so much that they treated him like royalty anyways. Any currency issued under his name was treated like real money at many establishments. One day, he was arrested by a private security force because of his mental health, which enraged practically all of San Francisco. The police chief let him go because he had committed no crime, and Norton gave an imperial pardon to the guy who arrested him. After this incident, any police officer Norton passed would salute him. Another time, when a riot had formed and was getting pretty violent, Norton simply stood in front of the mob and calmly prayed, which managed to disperse the mob. And that's not even a fraction of the crazy stuff that he did. On the 11th of February 1985, contact with Satellite 7 was lost. The station began to drift, and all systems shut down. At this time the station was uninhabited. Znibakov piloted his ship to intercept the forward port of Satellite 7 and matched the station's rotation. After hard docking to the station and confirming the station's electrical system was dead, Znibakov and Savinik sampled the station atmosphere prior to opening the hatch. Attired in winter fur-lined clothing, they entered the station to conduct repairs. Sergeant Stubby. During World War I, a soldier found a stray dog when training on the Yale University campus and took a liking to him. The soldier snuck the dog onto the ship when he had to leave campus, and when the dog was found by the commanding officer, he was allowed to stay because he had learned how to salute. Stubby was injured a few times during the war, but he was useful with alerting his squad of surprise mustard gas attacks and gunshots before the human ear could detect the sound. He also found and comforted wounded soldiers and caught a German soldier by the leg of his pants until American soldiers got to him. Aka, the best test boy to ever live. Louis XIX was king of France for 20 minutes. The shortest war ever recorded was around 40 minutes long. During the Salem witch trials, dogs were also accused of witchcraft. 2 dogs were executed because of it. In 2007 a paraglider got trapped in the updraft of 2 joining thunderstorms and was lifted to an altitude of 33,000 feet. She landed over 3 hours later about 60 kilometers north of her starting position, having survived extreme cold, lightning and lack of oxygen. The Roman Emperor Caligula once declared war against Neptune, god of the ocean. He led his soldiers to a beach and instructed them to stab the water. In 1993 a man taught geese to follow his ultralight aircraft glider. They didn't know how to migrate, so he flew all the way to an area where geese generally migrate to with his geese following. Spartan weddings. Basically, young Spartans would train 4 years in camps, surrounded only by men. So, when the time came for marriage, the women would shave their heads and dress in men's clothing, since the idea of having intercourse with anyone other than a man weirded out the grooms. The dancing plague of 1518. Not exactly historical, but a poodle named Cachi, in Caballito, Buenos Aires, fell from 13 floors and fatally hit 75-year-old Marta Espina, killing both instantly. In the course of the events, 46-year-old Edith Sala, who came to see the incident, was fatally hit by a bus. An unidentified man, who witnessed Edith's death, had an heart attack and also died on his way to the hospital. Mad Jack Churkill, the man with the only confirmed longbow kill in WWII, Guy and his squad did a death march towards the Germans while playing bagpipes, got captured and sent to a concentration camp. He then escaped, got caught again, and then escaped a different concentration camp. Also he always carried a Scottish langsword with him. There's so much other weird stuff he did after the war, and it's amazing to me that has entirely real. Consider subscribing if you enjoyed this video, and if you want to see more of Reddit universe,